Republican National Convention, a special edition of the Conservative Thrive brought to you by Liberty Nation News. Joining me today are some of the best political minds in the business: Tim Donner, John Klar, Dave Patterson, and Graham Noble. And we're going to discuss and dissect the announcement of that very sweet spot, the second seat on what will surely be the official Trump ticket. Ohio Senator J.D. Vance. Tim Donner, are we at all surprised? And what makes this guy the right number two?
Well, I think as Donald Trump was considering the 4 or the 5 who were considered the finalists, he had to decide what direction he wanted to take his ticket. If he had taken Marco Rubio, he would have had an appeal to his growing Hispanic base. He's now almost 50% Hispanic support. And he would have had an appeal to the Nikki Haley wing of the party. If he'd picked Doug Burgum, it would have basically said he's going to run by himself, because Burgum is very low key and would not be a big presence on the campaign. If he had picked Tim Scott, he would be looking for a play to his growing support among minorities, particularly Black men. And if he had picked Glenn Youngkin, it would have signaled that he was making a play for Virginia, and picked a guy who ran a flawless campaign when he became governor of Virginia. Instead of a mini-me, he wanted Trump 40 years younger. He wanted a guy who was an apostle of the America First agenda. He wanted a guy who was rags to riches, who had a back coming from poverty, finance, and of course, the United States Senator, now a vice presidential candidate. He's a good debater. He loves to go into the lion's den and debate his people who are his ideological opposites. And it doesn't hurt also people that his wife is a woman of color. So these are, I think, the things that were going through Donald Trump's head when he decided to pick J.D. Vance.
Okay, well, I have a tiny bit of a question here. We have a large population that does not identify as Republican or Democrat. They identify as independents. And J.D. Vance, he checks all the boxes. I love the guy. He checks all the boxes, but except one. He is very pro-life without hardly an exception. And I think he's going to lose, where are those independents going to go now?
Well, that's a state's issue now, if Donald Trump is still the leader of the party. So maybe that'll fade into the background. And I think a lot of Americans realize, too, that, maybe this time the woman's right to abort a child isn't the number one most important issue facing the country. I think the voters' priorities have shifted. But I think it's interesting what Tim points out. He is kind of the magic spot. And I found it interesting because he didn't simply jump to placate the social justice identity politics, which he can see is a horrible disaster anyway. And I think also it reflects a confidence in merit over race, and that he can win those people's votes without pandering to them the way, in contrast, certain parties do. And it's interesting, Tim, that immediately you pointed out the strength of his Indian wife, an attorney born to U.S. immigrants, in Newsweek just a couple hours ago put out a hit piece on her. You can't go after Kamala Harris, who we're told will totally wipe the floor with him in debates, and we'll see. I'm really looking forward to that one. That's another popcorn debate. But his wife, Newsweek's headline just a couple hours ago is, Usha Vance's connections to Supreme Court justices raises concerns.
Right.
Well, you might notice the headline is grammatically incorrect because the subject and verb don't agree, and the rest of the article is about the same. It lacks substance. They're attacking her solely for having clerked for Justices Kavanaugh and Roberts. So you went after Kavanaugh for something he did 40 years ago, and now you're going to go after an Indian immigrant woman for having achieved I can tell you as a lawyer, it's not easy to get a clerkship. It's actually the most difficult thing to do out of law school. And she did it, 2 clerkships, and now they're going to try to turn that asset into a liability. It's not going to stick. The gaslighting, the Democratic Party has become so dark that they can't turn the lights down on the rest of the country anymore with their false claims. And so they're in big, I think that's why also it's a choice pick. Plus he's a Rust Belt populist in the middle of several swing states that are needed. So it's many levels of good chess playing, I think.
But I think too, to your point, John, I think that the fact that the dark side has come out so quickly, as if they had all of these talking points already, regardless of, do I pick one from column A or column B? Who's the VP candidate? But it is revealing that they come out so quickly. And so it takes away from whatever substance they might have had by virtue of the fact that they have the lies already written with little bullet points.
Mhm. Yeah.
No, they
Well,
got
it reminds me
of the,
obituaries.
Do you
It
remember?
reminds me of this. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry for interrupting you, Graham, but it reminds me of when Trump made his Supreme Court pick. It was Kavanaugh, and they had placards printed up and ready to go.
Already printed.
Scandalizing every potential pick. And somebody let the cat out of the bag by holding up the wrong sign at the protest afterwards for a candidate who hadn't been picked, showing that they were all set to go to turn whoever it was into some authoritarian fascist. That's par for the course.
Well, I think it takes guts or stupidity to be in politics these days anymore anyway. But Graham, you were trying to cut in there. What were you about to?
Oh no, I was just going to remark that it reminds me of the spoof CNN headline that we saw the other day. I think we all saw it, and it said 12 women come forward to accuse whoever Trump picks as his VP.
Yes. Yes, I saw that.
But I think the Vance pick is more, I know that we talk about, and Tim broke down very excellently what each potential vice presidential pick brings to the table. But I honestly think that Trump, because he's never been a typical politician, sure, you could say, okay, JD Vance helps him enormously, possibly with the Rust Belt, particularly Ohio, Pennsylvania, possibly even Wisconsin, but 3 very important states, of course. But I think Trump really went for, I think he said to himself, I'm less concerned with that. I want a strong America First candidate. I think he's just this time around, he can do 4 more years in the White House and then he's done. I think he's going for broke. I think he's saying this is absolutely all about the MAGA agenda. And I want somebody at my side who's going to totally back me up on that agenda, more than, well, I'll pick this guy because maybe it'll help me with the Hispanic vote, or I'll pick this guy because maybe, I think he's just going all out. This is it. This is my 4 years. It's like make or break for the country as far as he is concerned. I'm going all in. And that's why probably Vance was one of the best people he could have picked if you're looking at it from that perspective.
So you're saying he's looking at 2028 as well as now. Is that what you're getting at there, Graham?
Well, I mean, yeah, partly because, of course, Vance is, obviously we all know Vance is a young guy, relatively speaking, amongst all of the dinosaurs on Capitol Hill and in Washington, D.C. in general. So, sure, I'm sure there's an element of that. I think he was thinking about someone who will carry on that America First agenda after he's finished. Mm-hmm. But I also think to a certain extent, he was just thinking about what he can do, what he can achieve just in the next 4 years, because all he can have is 4 more years. So I think he just decided, you know what, I'm going all in. It's MAGA, all the way, every day. And that's it. And that's what we're doing.
I think there's another element to this, which is, excuse me, John, I seem to be interrupting everybody. But, I'm old enough that if I don't express my thought, I'm liable to forget it. So.
You beat me to the buzzer, Dad.
I think one of the overlooked elements of this too is the inroads that Trump has made with young voters. J.D. Vance is 39 years old. Mm-hmm. He is 40 years younger, essentially, than both Trump and Biden. He's 20 years younger than Kamala Harris. He's the first millennial ever to be on a presidential ticket. You can't overlook that fact too, especially since the youth vote, which went so heavily for Joe Biden in 2020, is now basically split down the middle. That's a huge problem for Democrats. We talk a lot about minorities, but the youth vote is a serious problem for Democrats. And this just accentuates when you go from J.D. Vance, a youthful, vigorous 39 years old, to Joe Biden, a basically decrepit 80-year-old man. And the contrast is so striking. I mean,
well, there's another contrast too, which is what I was going to say. Sorry, Dave, I think you want to jump in and please do. But, there's another thing here. One of the biggest complaints the left is launching at him, because they really don't seem to have a lot of actual criticisms of him. And of course, you have to attack his character. And one of the biggest attacks is that, well, he criticized Trump. And that's actually maybe a plus for this party. We see more and more people as walkaways, and we want to see them welcome in the big tent of the Republican Party. The fact that Donald Trump is showing grace, or is it forgiveness, in a party that is in contrast with an unforgiving party that's going after Brett Kavanaugh for, something he did when he was in diapers, and now is going to go after Vance's wife because she clerked for is that all you got? And so I think a lot of Americans are starting to see this contrast between policy-based. That's the other thing about Vance, and what Graham was hitting upon. Vance is very consistent with a platform that's about rejuvenating the economy, creating jobs, and eliminating inflation. And that's appealing very much beyond the Rust Belt. So you've kind of got an overlap there. But think about how much everything that they're trying to paint the Republican Party as being, exclusive and racist. I mean, this guy is totally destroying their social justice narrative, let alone the contrast with our other vice president. So I think, that's also part of the youth aspect and part of why they made the selection.
When
we dislike the guy because he used to feel exactly the same way about Trump that we do.
Exactly.
Well, I mean,
yeah, he is definitely someone that the left particularly hates,
yes man, and that's
because he used to be on their side. See, that's the thing that really bugs them. He used to be one of the elites. He was a never Trumper. He was one of them. And now he's a traitor.
Which makes him an asset, not a liability.
Well, to us,
to our party. Yeah.
To those of us that look at this,
I don't know, maybe Trump is trying to strike a balance. Maybe he's going, I don't need a yes man. I need somebody to talk me off the ledge if I go a little nutty.
Well,
yes men are not helpful.
A lot of it is a personal thing too. It's a matter of, when you're president, who do you want to look at every single day when you're talking about the most important decisions that have to be made concerning the nation and the world? Do you want to look, would you prefer to look at Marco Rubio, Glenn Youngkin, Tim Scott, J.D. Vance? I mean, a lot of it is at a personal level. Now, I will say, though, that I think there is something of a missed opportunity here. As much as I agree with Graham that this should not have been a pick based on trying to appease the DEI agenda, diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's certainly clear that young people and Hispanics and Black men particularly have become more and more open to the message of Donald Trump. And by picking someone like a Tim Scott, he would have sent the message that, this is an assault on the entire nation to try and get the Republican tent to expand for the future. And I don't mean assault, but it would be an assault on the, the sensibilities of the political class by saying, I'm not going to accept that Black people have to be Democrats. I'm not going to accept that Hispanics or that young people or that suburban women have to be Democrats. And he did not choose to go in that direction. That doesn't mean it was wrong, but I think there was something of a missed opportunity there.
I don't think so. I think people are sick of that, and they don't. After Kamala, they see they got no results, so it'd just be more Tweedledum and Tweedledee. But anyway, just I think people are tiring of the race stuff.
A lot of people are sick of it, John, but I don't think the left is sick of anything. And if you've got a bunch of independents out there, that's where my worry goes.
I hear you. Yeah, but I think the
where are they
independents
going to land? They've got to land somewhere. Are they going to land with RFK Jr. or
well, remember?
No, I'm getting off track.
There's also the element here that, Trump's positioning in the polls. Now, if he was 3 points behind instead of 3 points ahead, if Biden was a worthy opponent who could make a comeback, if he hadn't had that horrible debate performance, if he hadn't been shot in the head, maybe he would have picked someone different. Maybe he would have picked someone that would help him pick up a state, for example, like Virginia, or secure the Midwest. But he also had to feel that he didn't really need to do that because he's winning this race. Winning.
I think Tim, that there's perhaps subtle, but I think there is at least another dynamic at work, and that is, I think that President Trump wanted to be more of himself, more outward, more ebullient, more in your face, not critically or viciously, but just more outgoing. And he needed someone who could send the message incisively and surgically and devastatingly. And when you listen to J.D. Vance talking, he does not, he uses words very, very judiciously, and they're to the point, and the person goes away thinking they've won, but bleeding on the way out. And he is just exceptional. And I think that contrast makes the ticket very, very appealing.
Well, there's something bigger, if I could just jump in, because there's a bigger thing going on here that, we're looking at the VP pick, but we can't look at it outside the context of some seismic events, one of which is, yes, an assassination attempt, but other is an abysmal Democratic performance at debate. So what's happened, I think, is much bigger, and this is part of it. And I'm reminded, when I look at what's going on right now, of Thomas Frank's book, Listen, Liberals, some years ago, in which he pointed out that the liberals were becoming the Martha's Vineyard elite class. This is a Democrat. And the most important message in that book that liberals ignored was, you cannot build your party and its future solely on hating one person. You cannot build your policy and your platform as, I hate Donald Trump, we hate Donald Trump bad, we must end Donald Trump. And now, frankly, when he was almost killed, they realized without him, they couldn't win again. They'd only lose worse against any of the other people we're talking about. But also, the entire mantra is shifting. Here's The Nation yesterday now about Vance, because they're trying to keep doing the same thing. They said of Vance, the headline of the article was that he is the future of the party, and he said he's the perfect vessel for the soulless pseudo-populist MAGA tyranny. So on they go with this hate. They haven't got it yet that Americans are looking at things like borders, international relations, inflation, actual standards of living, all the things that have been jettisoned in favor of identity politics. So I think there's something bigger going on, because even though you're right, Sarah, that the left is trying to speak to their base, the people in the middle, I think they're tiring and starting to see through it. I think this is collapsing down around their ears, and that's why trying to apply those same tools against Vance makes him a pretty interesting mirror for the nation, because I think all of their best laid plans are just falling away like worse than Teflon. They're bouncing back at them. And so
you could see the futility in the interview that Joe Biden did with Lester Holt of NBC on Monday evening. Yes. He did all the necessary, we just pray for Donald Trump's recovery. It's the first time he ever called him Donald, right after he had been shot. But after the perfunctory 30 seconds or a minute of we pray for his recovery, there's no place for violence and all this stuff, Biden went right back on the whole fascist thing. He jumped back to Charlottesville
He
and
doesn't
talked
know any
about
better.
why he ran for president. And he wasn't going to run, but then he saw Charlottesville and the whole very fine people thing, and he ran. I mean, this man is living in the past. He's living in 2020. He's living in a place where he doesn't understand what's going on. And now imagine him, who cannot process 90 minutes in a debate, trying to process how to go forward in a campaign where essentially the one argument he had left was that Trump is a danger to the country. And now he does not have even that anymore. And as he stumbled through a really embarrassing interview that concluded with him essentially accusing Lester Holt, who's a fine journalist, of being biased against him, you could see that Joe Biden has no clue about where to go with things now.
When in doubt,
He's
point and
going
blame.
right back to, he didn't use fascist and dictator and all that stuff, but he went back to the same narrative about the dangers of Donald Trump,
Same failed
as
playbook.
if he had learned nothing from what happened in Butler,
Okay.
Pennsylvania.
I want to go. Sorry, Tim, I didn't mean to cut you off. I want to go a little bit forward, and so we know presumptively that we have a ticket, Trump Vance, and presumptively, unless something weird goes down in August, Biden Harris. Graham, can you maybe sketch out in your mind what might happen between a vice presidential debate?
It's going to be very entertaining. I can't wait. Actually, I'm definitely going to record it to watch over and over again. For my personal amusement afterwards, because I just can't imagine. I think Kamala Harris would have a hard time debating herself, and I think up against Vance, I mean, there's no comparison to me. That would be like a debate between. What's that young guy's name? Hogg, the activist, the guy whose school got shut up, but he wasn't even there at the time.
David
Makes a
Hogg.
big deal about it.
Yeah, David.
It would be like a debate between David Hogg and Ben Shapiro, basically. It's going to be the same kind of thing. Harris and Vance, and of course, you know how it's going to go, because Harris is just going to stick to the normal emotional platitudes, and Vance is going to be rational. And I think I very much hope that a lot of, you see, Sarah, you were expressing a very rational concern about Vance's appeal to independence. And I'm going to say that I think the independents that would be turned off by Vance, the ones who would say, "Oh, Donald Trump's picked JD Vance as his running mate. Oh, that's it. I can't vote for Trump." I think those people were probably veering away from Trump anyway, and probably weren't likely to vote for him anyway. I think the other independents, once they get the chance to actually hear, they may not even know much about JD Vance. I mean, how many Americans actually do know and all that much about JD Vance? I mean, sure, you've heard his name of late, last year or two, but really, I think a lot of Americans don't really know who he is or what he's about. And I think when they finally hear him speak and hear him, kind of verbalize the agenda and the plan and his thinking and his attitude towards some of the big issues of the day, I think they will warm to him quite a lot, and they'll say, "Hey, this is a pretty smart, articulate guy, and he's young, and he's kind of full of vigor, and he really believes in his cause." And I think it will actually fire up a lot of independents who were maybe totally on the fence about Trump to say, "Hey, I like this guy who is picked." And coming back to the debate, I think that will help. I would hope a lot of these independents do tune in to the Kamala Harris JD Vance debate, because I think that's going to be quite an eye opener. I mean, Kamala Harris is going to be enormously amusing. We know that. She's going to give us all a good laugh.
Democrats only have one strategy against the Republicans. that I can legitimately agree
Yeah, and
on.
that strategy is emotion,
That
pure emotion.
is it's striking down Roe v. Wade. That's still resonating with people. A lot of people don't understand that wasn't a federal law. And if you want to have Congress write something up and send it over and everybody agree on it, then you'd have that. But they don't have that. And it should have gone back to the states. But that doesn't mean that people understand that. And so they are pointing and blaming. And that's the only issue I see that they have to stand on. And a lot of independents are very pro-choice.
I was going to say, I think there's a couple of narratives that are easy to overlook here. Important things. I'm pretty confident in saying there has never before been a candidate for vice president or president who has had an Oscar-winning movie and a best-selling book about his life out in the marketplace now for several years. I mean, you want to know about J.D. Vance, watch the movie Hillbilly Elegy or read the book.
It's powerful. It's
a rags to riches story. And you want to know, I mean, this guy won an Oscar as the executive producer of the movie Hillbilly Elegy, which I've now watched, and it's an excellent movie. I have not read the book, although I'm told that the movie is
incredible.
Is a faithful rendition of the book. Obviously, you can't do it in a lot of detail like you can in the book. But here's the other narrative that we've missed in the fog of this assassination attempt. And that is that, ironically, it has probably saved Joe Biden's candidacy. You guys may remember in college basketball, they used to have a phenomenon called the four corners offense. And the design of it was you'd get down near the end of the race, at the end of the game, and you'd spread out your players and you just pass to the four corners to run out the clock, to run down the clock. Well, that's what Joe Biden is essentially trying to do here. Let's not forget the Democratic convention is now about a month away. And this assassination attempt has basically put the kibosh on Democrats' widespread attempt, 19 different elected Democrats who came out saying he needs to step down. I don't know what happens to them now, but I can tell you that Joe Biden is now in a better position to retain his spot at the top of the ticket than before those shots rang out in Butler, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, Tim. I think that's that is an interesting consequence of what this horrible event that happened to Trump, and in your words, gave Biden the ability to stall to the end of the game. But I think too that there's an aspect of J.D. Vance in picking J.D. Vance, which I must tell you, I was a little surprised, because you always look at what are you getting into when you take someone who's on your side, who votes right down the line with you, and you take him out of play in the Senate. Well, now what you've done is, instead of one competition for presidency, you have two now. You have the president's competition and the filling of J.D. Vance's position in Ohio as senator. My sense is, and I heard someone before we went on air mention Vivek Ramaswamy, standing in the wings, and that could be very much part of Donald Trump's calculus. To suggest that he's spur of the moment and not calculating would be a mistake. And so I think that he probably has the heir apparent to the J.D. Vance senatorial seat pretty much lined up.
Yeah, Vivek has said that he'll take it. He was talking about an interview, and he's been very strongly supportive of Vance, which shows good character and, party loyalty and team playing, in contrast to the Democrats right now. But I really want to hit on something Tim said briefly, which is, I'll hit on it briefly. He represents hope for the economic future. And we're battling, if we are, instead of just battling over skin color and sexual preferences, if America's going to have an election about issues, and if we're going to look at history when we used to, then things like the climate and abortion tend to shift down the list when you have 20 to 30% inflation, 40% in 4 years, food inflation in many areas, and open borders, lost jobs, can't afford a house.
Yeah.
I mean, this country's in trouble. And for the first time, maybe in 100 years, Americans are looking at their children having a lower standard of living than they had. The message of rebuilding the Rust Belt and a person and a team who are there and focusing on what Americans are looking for, they're going to be listening. This is about rebuilding the economy and saving America from more debt and more destitution and more suffering. And the death of the American dream is at stake. And I think that's a wonderful contrast to show what the Democrats have on offer while they poo-poo immigrant crime and poo-poo everything else that they've done in their destruction. It's only getting worse for them. And Vance kind of really holds that up. He's a mirror to the Democrats in his achievements, and he's got no real dirt. They're just going to have a hard time.
I think
So-
it's worth also considering, you know, everyone talks about the abortion thing, you know, that in 2022 in the midterms, the abortion issue, you know, Roe v. Wade was gone, and the progressive left managed to actually gaslight a lot of Americans who don't pay close attention to these things into thinking that when the Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade, they essentially, it was like the equivalent of banning abortion. You know, that's how the progressives managed to persuade a lot of people of that oh, Roe v. Wade is gone, so now women just no longer have the right. They no longer have access to abortion because of the Supreme Court. And of course, that wasn't true at all. But here's the thing. That was the midterms. That was all about Congress. That was all about the Senate, the House of Representatives. And so the Democrats were playing it like, well, you know, you've got to give us control of Congress so that we can protect abortion rights, which have now been scrapped, annihilated because of the Supreme Court. So you've got to give us the Senate and the House so that we can fight for your rights. And I think that that played very well for them in 2022. But this time it's the general election, and people are thinking, okay, people are still thinking about the, you know, the down ticket races, but really what's on everyone's mind is the state of the country and who is going to sit in the Oval Office and fix that. And so I don't think the whole abortion message is going to play as well for Democrats this time around as it did during the midterms. I don't think it's going to be, it's still a thing. But I think as long as now, you know, whatever your personal feelings about abortion are, you know, personally, I'm not a big fan of it at all, to say the least. But nevertheless, I am also, you know, mostly a libertarian, and I don't want there to be a federal ban on abortion, quite frankly. And I don't think the Republicans should be talking about it because I just don't think it plays well, and I don't think that's where the country's at. But anyway, all I'm saying is that, you know, the abortion thing is not going to be as big a deal this time around as it was in the midterms.
There is
the
another
proper-
community that J.D. Vance will help bring to the Republican Party, or at least to vote for President Trump, and that's the military. This will be the first time since we have had a candidate since John McCain, who has had military experience, and he's a Marine and he served in Iraq, and that will resonate with a lot of our military members who have slowly but surely started to move toward the Democratic side, that never happened before.
I know.
And so that having J.D. Vance as a former Marine on the ticket, I think will play well for Republicans and for Donald Trump.
Well,
Just as an
might feel
aside,
that he has a
aside on
voice.
the pro-life side, I think I heard one person look at a interviewer and say, "Let me get this straight. For over 50 years, we have been criticizing Roe versus Wade. What is it about winning we don't get?"
Well, yeah, they were not, the Republicans were simply not prepared for success on this.
I know.
They had gotten so comfortable with their oppositional stance and all the things they could do to fight the abortionists that they didn't spend enough time thinking about something that was not shocking, that the Supreme Court would overturn Roe versus Wade. They saw it coming. People predicted it. It was not a shot out of the blue, and yet they weren't prepared to, to handle it. But I think Donald Trump has handled it perfectly because he's taken the proper constitutional position, which is that, look, if you want to live in a state where you can get an abortion right up to the time of birth, go live in Vermont if that's really important to you. If you want to live in a state where you can't get an abortion no matter what, then you can live there. But basically what Democrats are saying in a general election context, which, as Graham properly pointed out, is very different than a midterm. Abortion is a midterm issue. The issues of a general election are war and peace, peace and prosperity, the economy, national security. And so basically what Democrats will say to voters is, well, we've opened the border. There's 11 million at least illegal immigrants that we're paying to sustain with taxpayers. The border's on fire. There's rampant crime in big cities. Inflation is hitting everywhere. The cost of living is soaring. But if you elect us, you won't have to leave your state to kill your baby. That's essentially the argument.
That you're right.
Isn't it? The argument.
That's the argument.
And the point that you brought up, it can be amplified by saying things. And oh, by the way, coming through that porous border were 8 Tajikistani citizens who were on the terror watch list, and nobody talked to one another. The FBI knew it, but the Border Patrol did not, and let me see, the lack of communication, didn't that give us 9/11? What is, people have got to understand this administration is absolutely broken.
Yeah.
No argument there. I think you've got thousands of people right now in Milwaukee probably discussing the same thing and getting fired up.
Look, I think we saw this same kind of thing in 1980 when Jimmy Carter, just everything was going against him. You could see he was going to lose. Ronald Reagan was on the upswing. And you're seeing the same thing happening now. The difference is, though, with Jimmy Carter, he was full of youth and energy and ideas and idealism, and he was personally popular. He had the capacity to potentially turn the race back the other way because of the political assets that he did have. Joe Biden can't possibly do that because he's lost the battle with time and he's lost the battle with, cognitive fluidity, for lack of a better term. He can't turn it around.
Physically and mentally not able, as far as I can see.
But they can't kick him out now. And I think it was still very possible.
He's lost the battle with credibility.
Well, they would have, I think that they would have had to be the Pelosi, Schumer, Clyburn walk together to the White House and say, Mr. President, it's over, you've got to leave. I think that would have been very possible. I don't see that happening now because this crazy, insane election season, which we all knew would be crazy and insane, but none of us thought we'd see that debate, this
Nobody
assassination
thought
attempt.
expert crazy.
Yeah,
Gracious.
May I ask the panel a question? I would like to ask you a question. So in view of what we're discussing, and I think and you make the mention of Reagan, Carter, I think the issue now isn't whether Republicans win, short of a lot of things like, the decrepit one declares martial law to protect us from climate change. But short of that, and I'm not sure that'd go over well, if we have an actual election, it raises the issue then more and more people switching over to Republican side, they're going to vote, many of them, including those independents, down ticket all the way down to state government. And so it's important to win by margin. And I'm curious, here's my question. Do you think Kamala Harris would stick her head in the noose of agreeing to a debate or a series of debates with J.D. Vance? Because I think we know how that would go for her, notwithstanding the mainstream media saying that she would mop the floor with him.
Well,
So-
it's already been scheduled. She can't back
Has it?
out of it.
Oh, good. Oh, forgive me for my ignorance. I didn't know that. So
Yes.
how do you think that impacts our
It
election?
was scheduled before
Yeah, there's
we
all
knew
sorts of
who
wiggle
the
room.
Republican VP would be.
So how do you folks think that plays? Do you think it has importance? Because we're talking, I mean, mostly people look at the presidential candidate, but this seems to be particularly important VP race.
Well,
when
I don't
people
think
just
the
looking at them as a
Democrats like
backup.
Harris any more than the Republicans like Harris. I
That's
think
right.
both sides of the aisle and the independents all think she's kind of a dingbat.
Empty
That's-
vessel.
Crash and burn. Yeah. So do you
My
think
goodness,
that's going to make the
you can't start, with that narrative, because where that leads is, well, we don't have to worry about Kamala. That is absolutely untrue, because there is a constituency there, and you don't have to have it
Mhm.
in reality. The media will build it for her.
Yeah.
They'll make her,
Well, if that's who they decide they
Joan
want to
of-
go,
Joan
go
of
all
Arc
in
from
for.
California. And you just have to realize that you cannot for 1 second let your guard down and think anything is in the bag, because it never
Yeah.
is.
If JD Vance starts out the debate and just asks her this question, when did you know? And if you didn't know, how come you didn't know? Do you not work with this guy?
Yeah.
When
I mean,
did you know he was incapable
which would be
and
worse?
is in trouble?
Which would be worse? That you didn't
mean,
know what
She would have
everybody
to-
else could
she would
see,
have
or
to
that you could
be
see it
very
too,
dishonest.
and you covered it up. I mean, which is worse? That you were ignorant of it or claimed to be, or that you knew perfectly well and you did nothing about it? I mean, she'll be
there's no-
savaged. I mean,
I
I
don't see
think
how she gets out of that.
if,
I think
if
it's a
they
one
throw
question
her,
debate.
throwing her to the wolves.
I think
she
she
really
gets-
hasn't been challenged, and now
she
she's
gets
Yeah.
out of it because the debate moderators will not allow JD Vance to ask her that question. That's how she gets out of it.
Well, they don't get
Rules,
to
schmools.
they don't get to orchestrate those debates as much as they like to think they do. And all he has to do is, that's a very good question, moderator. But the better question is, when did you
Yeah,
know that
That's what I would
during
do.
your weekly lunches with the president that he was using the wrong fork every time? When did this all kind of come to pass? And then the next is, oh, by the way, how did you imagine that getting the root causes to our immigration problem would be solved by planting apple trees? How did that come about? What line of thinking were you thinking to come up with that as a solution to 12 million illegal immigrants coming across our border?
Who knows what she's thinking? I want to go a little bit off of the vice president subject and go on to the convention. And it's been interesting for me to see that so many people are just calm. It's changed. I thought it was going to be more raucous. And yeah, they're fist pumping, fight for Trump. But it seems to me that on the floor, it's a little more calm. Am I missing something?
Yeah,
And also, what the heck is up with the teleprompter issues?
I think that one of the things that I noticed, and I watched quite a bit of it, and the word that I would assign to the first day was joyous. They were joyous that
Okay, good.
about what was happening. And even if they had concerns about JD Vance before, there wasn't a single person who said that wasn't a great choice. And the tenor of all the speakers was upbeat, and the floor was joyous.
Well, it was notable that there was a piece in Slate, which is a left-wing site, and it it was on Tuesday morning after the first day of the convention. And it said, I went to Milwaukee expecting darkness and anger. And what I got was essentially joy and jubilation. In other words, he was absolutely shocked, this left-wing writer, that he showed up at the Republican convention.
Have they been fired yet?
And and saw what he saw. He was sure that he would see a dark conspiratorial tone, like a wet blanket over the convention, and, vicious attacks on Biden and the left and denouncing him from the podium and all this. And instead, what they got was what Dave just described, this upbeat, he dodged a bullet. This guy is bigger than life. He's no longer a man. He's a force of nature. And I think that's what you sort of saw at the convention on that first night, was a realization that this guy, whether you love him or hate him, he's not like the rest of us.
He is courageous.
And then you had sorry.
I'm sorry, Graham. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, then you had the president of one of the biggest trades unions in the country showing that level of respect and enthusiasm for a Republican presidential candidate. That's to me, that's a sign that things are not the way they used to be.
And to that point, Graham,
indeed,
the fact that Sean O'Brien was there, and incidentally, the invitation was extended to him. He accepted it. The Democrats did not yet extend an invitation to speak at the Democratic convention. But he talked about the working man constantly. It was the force of the working man and women who make this country run. And he ascribed that that honor to the Republicans, which, the Teamsters have endorsed. They endorsed Nixon. They endorsed Reagan. They didn't endorse Bush the first time. And they endorsed, and I think that's it, Tim. I think those are the ones that they have actually come out with a union endorsement. But the fact is, we look at ourselves. We are working people. We do identify with the people who build our buildings and build our airplanes and pave our streets and
Grow your food
and farm your food, exactly. And for him to come in and say the things that he did, the only thing that we now hope for is when Trump wins, the Congress doesn't immediately go to try to repeal Davis-Bacon, as they always do.
Well, they'll be too busy trying to impeach him again.
Oh, yeah.
Why would you even bother with just 4 years? Why would you bother? I don't understand.
They're still going to do it.
How the
that's a good question.
Hatred machine works.
That's an excellent question, Sarah. Why would you bother? But they are going to. That. They are going to try to impeach Trump over and over again. They're gonna bog down his. There's all kinds of organizations on the left that have already said that they are gearing up to sue the Trump administration pretty much, every single day.
It's called there's a massive movement of Trump proofing going on Capitol Hill right now. And they're scared to death. They really believe that the Heritage Foundation Project 2025 agenda, which of course they've grabbed onto to show that Trump is an extremist, even though it's not Trump's platform, it's the Heritage Foundation. But, they have latched onto the few things that they have left. And I'd like to raise the question, guys and gal, of what you all think that Democratic convention is going to look like in a month. I mean, you want something that's going to have a funereal atmosphere where that the bulk of the delegates, probably 90%, know that he's Joe Biden is going to lose. And they're dispirited. They know that he can't up his game because he's not capable of it. They know Kamala Harris is subjecting her, throwing her into the lion's den of running against Donald Trump would be. I mean, I think I'd feel sorry for her. But what does anybody here envision of what the Democratic convention is going to be like? Can it just be an attack fest on Trump now that they took a shot at his head? I mean, can they just keep calling Trump a fascist and dictator? Can they get away with that now?
I think it's going to look exactly the way things looked in liberal and progressive circles the day after the election in 2016. Disbelief, boo-hooing, just the opposite, the happy theater face and the sad theater face. And the sad theater face is going to be that environment. It's going to be low energy. It's going to be despair. It's going to be, we got to do this. We don't want to do this.
I will take a contrarian view here. I don't think it's going to be any of that. They're going to bring in the LGBTQ XYZ, and they're going to liven the place up. All the guys in dresses, showing off their latest ensembles, and they'll have everything that we find as conservatives repugnant. They will be celebrating it. And I keep going back to this theme. Do not for 1 second let your guard down. These people are out to get the country for themselves and not you.
They are. And
I don't think anybody
disagrees
with you on that one.
Yeah, but I think most people think, Dave, after everything that's happened, after the cover-up of Biden's condition, after the rhetoric where he said, we need to put a bullseye on Trump, 10 days before somebody did. I think that the jig is up on that. And I think that trying to go in the direct look right now, the Democrats are in abject panic, basically believing, yes, we're going to lose the presidential election, but we cannot afford to lose the House and Senate. But, the downdraft from one of the worst candidates ever to run for president is going to be unmistakable. They're going to put all their eggs in the congressional basket.
I think that's true. I totally agree.
And you won't get that by putting on a display of perversion at the Democratic.
I think whatever they show, because I'm not going to try to predict what they're going to show, is a continuing disconnect from the American working class, which is back to what Dave was saying.
Yes.
And what our values are. And I think that's what the divergence has been. And I think it's crashing and burning around their ears. And they can't change horses in mid-race either in person or in policy. So yeah, there will be the drag queens and all. They can't alienate their far left extremism. But I think underneath it all is failure, policy failure to help the economy. But we'll see.
And I'm going to say that I would love to be able to say that the Democrats will not stoop this low, but I believe they will. I believe by the time the convention comes around, they're going to hope, or they're going to convince themselves that everybody's forgot about the fact that somebody tried to take Donald Trump's head off at a rally, and they are going to double down on Orange Man bad, threat to democracy. This is an absolute catastrophe, because we are about to, the country's about to become an authoritarian dictatorship. And, and basically this is the fault of and I think they're pretty much going to give the message that, this is the fault of the American people if you allow this to happen. I think they're just going to absolutely double down on their worst.
Yes.
I think that
more
will
nails in their own coffin. Sorry.
That would be one of the biggest riverboat gambles in American political history, because they could come out of this absolutely shredded as a party. They already don't control the House. They already barely control the Senate, and they've already lost West Virginia, which it means you essentially are at 50-50 in the Senate, which means if Trump wins, J.D. Vance becomes the president of the Senate and breaks the ties. They're already behind, albeit narrowly, in the House. How many times would you have a candidate as weak as Joe Biden at the top of the ticket and have down ballot candidates do perfectly well? There has to be a downdraft, and the party is in utter despair about that. Now, they don't know what to do, but they could be looking at a wipeout of the White House, the Senate, and the House, on top of a 6-3 conservative majority in the Supreme Court. So you can understand why the left is now in a state of open panic and, I think, depression, to be honest with you. You looked at the faces of those anchors on CNN or MSNBC in the aftermath of the assassination attempt. They mostly looked like they'd lost their best friend. They mostly look like, oh my God, the election is over now. You could see it.
I think there's another element, Tim, that will play, and that is the atmospherics of the Democratic convention when the Hamas supporters start to riot in front of the convention center.
As
At
Graham
the
has
McCormick
pointed out,
Center,
yeah.
I believe it's the McCormick Center is where it's going to be. And that is going to be 1968 all over again.
And
Could be.
it's very well organized, by the way. There's over
Absolutely.
There's a
50,
lot of confusion
there's
and
50
chaos.
different groups that are participating in the organizing and execution of these protests. They've been planned for months. So if the Democrats didn't already have enough problem with an enfeebled candidate losing to a guy who'd never been ahead in the popular vote before, who looked like he was politically dead on January 6th, 2021. I don't know what else could turn up at this point.
The problem Chicago has is that they don't have Mayor Richard J. Daley to stop the madness.
Yes,
That
mayor,
is true.
that mayor of Chicago, I don't know what he's going to do because he is a progressive through and through. And he probably is in full agreement with the anti-Semitic protesters.
Mm-hmm.
But his city's reputation is on the line. I mean, it took Chicago a long time to recover from the 1968 convention and the reputation. And they don't want to restart that narrative again. But is this mayor capable of stopping it? I have serious doubts.
I just fear
Maybe
that
we're
the
just
whole
seeing
message, I
some
fear that
random
the
karma
underlying,
come back.
I just fear that the underlying theme of the Democratic convention is going to be as simple as this. And it's a horrible message, but I believe this is the theme. The theme is we kind of all know that we're going to lose the White House, although none of us are going to actually come out and say it, out loud, but we know that. And so what we're doing now is we're going to do our best to tell the country that things are going to be so bad, things are going to be so awful once Trump gets back to the White House, that we are just telling you now that we're justifying the fact that we are going to cause absolute chaos for the next 4 years, both as much as they can legally and legislatively, but also physically in the streets, in the cities. I think we're possibly in for 4 years of the summer of 2020.
Ooh,
I wish I could
doesn't sound
disagree.
like fun at all.
I hope not. Let's pray not.
All right, guys, I think it's time we wrap this discussion up. I'd like to thank our panel.
Oh, we should have ended on a more optimistic note than that. I'm sorry.
Fight.
There you
Okay.
go.
Still back to thanking our panel, Dave Patterson, John Clark, Mr. Tim Donner, Graham Noble. That's it for our live GOP convention Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform. YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble, we're on them all. As well, Liberty Nation News has its own Roku channel where you can see all of our TV productions. I'm your host, Sarah Cowgill. Thanks for joining us today for Free Thinking, Free Speech, LibertyNation.com.